He cocked his head and picked up Chen Aiqing's chin, said, "Today I'd bring you a family extermination case that involved with a really twisted love triangle situation. A man, a woman, and 2 children were slaughtered brutally. The cold-blooded killer was eventually caught, and this mysterious case led to a tale of deep-rooted resentment and heart-wrenching love. Tears flowed freely during the bitter separation of life and death. Yet the regret of a lifetime of unfulfilled love could not be washed away. In the early morning of the last day of 2011, in a small village in Xuchang City, central of Henan Province, 2 villagers wandered to their neighbor's house casually as usual. But instantly they felt that the vibe was strange. You know, villagers often leave their doors open during daytime in a rather close and friendly environment like this. The door was closed. Strike 1. So they knocked on the doors, but there was no one answer for quite some time. Strike 2. 2 of them felt the sticky and moistened feeling passing through their feet. They, of course, looked down and found their shoes were dyed red by this thick and gluey fluids passing through the doors. The 2 of them looked at each other and found the same worried and panicked face. There must be something terrible happened. The police arrived at about 10 minutes later. The sewage had soaked the entire courtyard. A man was lying on his back, with stab wounds to his head and neck, and to his right there was a female body. Her body was covered with wounds and injuries as well, especially to her head, neck, and chest, and there were large amounts of sprayed blood everywhere in the living room. It was already very, very bloody and cruel to look at, but that wasn't the end of it. When the police searched down to the house and entered the other room, they found 2 other bodies lying on the bed. They were kids. A boy and a girl also had fatal damage to their head. According to the forensics, they all died a few hours prior, and the female body had a lot more wounds and injuries than the rest of those deceased, especially to her pubic area. There was damage that was done after she had passed away, which meant that the killer must hated her so much. By interviewing with the neighbors, the police got some basic information about the victims. The female body was named Chen Aiqing, and she was 36 years old at the time. She was a single mother of 3. Her oldest daughter was at school when this tragedy happened, and her absence saved her. And the female victim seemed to have a boyfriend whom was missing from the crime scene. The male body found next to Chen Aiqing still remained unknown. He seemed like a stranger to the village. Therefore, the police had to release photos from the crime scenes locally in the village in the hope that there would be someone recognize it. Not long after, a man called Feng Xianjun came up to the police and claimed that the male victim was his younger brother, Feng Xianwei. Through unveiling the identity of Feng Xianwei, a tangled and twisted love triangle was revealed. Liu Yun'an was from northeast of China. He was 42 years old at the time, and upon his release from prison, Liu Yun'an was introduced to this lady, Chen Aiqing. She was 31 years old and very good looking. So at first, Liu Yun'an was hesitated and subconsciously avoided contact with such beautiful women. In his mind, he had no advantage. He looked mediocre. His family wasn't wealthy, and he couldn't even finish his secondary school. He tried so hard to make a living, but ended up for prison, although he realized that his past was a total mess when he served time in jail. Basically, he thought he was not a good match to this great lady, Chen Aiqing. But she was such an adorable woman, you know. She listened. She was so communicative, fully thoughtful, and considerate. Despite she knew he was recently released from prison and he was 11 years older than her, she was still so nice to him, and she even took the initiative to add his contact so they could have further communications online. Like all lovebirds, they chatted day and night via social medias. During this period, though, they still lived in different parts of China. And finally, Liu Yun'an decided to meet her up in person. He moved 1,300 miles from the northeast of China to Henan province. In Liu Yun'an's eyes, the two of them were so in love, he would do anything just to please her. Not long after they met, Liu Yun'an wanted to bring her back to the northeast of China, while Chen Aiqin's children stayed in Henan and continued their boarding schools. Coincidentally, it was during the school registration when Liu Yun'an was about to take her away. He thought that he was gonna be the man of this about to set family. So he brought up that he could pay for her kids, this 8,000 yuan tuition fees. And to be able to afford this 8,000 yuan, Liu Yun'an had to lend out 20 acres of land of his family at about 1,000 yuan, which is extremely low price. The relationship between the two actually caused Liu Yun'an's family's concern. His sister once commented, "Your girlfriend in a way too pretty. Could she really be serious? There is quite some age gap between you. You must want to look into it more carefully." We don't know if she is trustworthy yet. However, Liu Yun'an was feeling strongly for this woman, who defended for Chen Aiqin and claimed that if she was a real fraud, he would fall nonetheless. Liu Yun'an once confessed to his sister that he felt almost pity for her. As a single mother, she must dealt with countless troubles and difficulties. If the two of them was just a trade for her, and she was solely after money with him, he would give whatever he had, willingly, and treat it as a donation and charity to this very tough and brave mother. As an aged man, but rashly out of jail, he would sacrifice everything to be with her, even if it's just a short dream. Wasn't he just brainwashed himself a bit too much at this point? After being with Chen Aiqin, Liu Yun'an was filled with confidence, and he worked harder and got better. He was basically very motivated from this relationship, which is not bad for a person to develop himself, I guess, from a relationship. However, Liu Yun'an's plans for life reached to a pause. Chen Aiqin's cousin Feng Xianwei called from Henan, telling them that her oldest daughter was always getting into troubles and was difficult to discipline. Because Liu Yun'an loved children and he wanted to please Chen Aiqin, he decided to bring her children to Suihua City, where they live in the northeast. After some thoughts, in order to achieve this goal, Liu Yun'an had to borrow from his family again for about 4,000 yuan to make the school transference. After the whole school thing settled, Liu Yun'an invited this so-called cousin Feng Xianwei to dinner to express thanks while he was taking care of her children. But Liu Yun'an felt there was something odd at the dinner table. He noticed Feng Xianwei was all over Chen Aiqin. He often touched her arms and shoulders, leaned tightly against her. They looked weirdly close. Feng Xianwei even wanted to follow and escort Chen Aiqin to toilet. This sounds incredibly creepy and unnatural. Thankfully, Liu Yun'an thought the same, and he stopped this suspicious cousin from acting even more weird. When he was stopped though, Feng Xianwei had this embarrassed face. on him. Oh, so he knew it was inappropriate. After they got home, Liu Yun'an raised questions about this weird cousin, but Chen Aiqin insisted that Feng Xianwei was indeed her cousin, and there was nothing more to it. Liu Yun'an gave up questioning and bought her stories that time. But deep down in his heart, the seeds of doubt had been planted. One night, Chen Aiqin received a phone call from Feng Xianwei. The latter was crying and shouting on the other end of the phone. Then Chen Aiqin also started to weep while Liu Yun'an was sleeping right next to her. Because neither of the calling parties cared to lower their voice, Liu Yun'an heard basically everything about their conversations. At least now, Liu Yun'an couldn't lie to himself anymore. It's a sure thing that the so-called cousin was never a cousin, he was her lover. But Liu Yun'an didn't have the courage to unveil this because she was pregnant. Although he wasn't sure if it's his, Liu Yun'an just simply didn't want to lose it all. So he pretended that there was nothing changed. He wanted so badly for their normal life to come back. The following day, after the phone call, after all kids were sent to school, Chen Aiqin brought up, "I want some alone time. And I want you to take care of my children during my absence. I'd bring back my choice when I'm ready. If I were to choose you, I'd be with you forever. But if I chose him, I'd pay you back with all the tuition fees you have paid for my kid." He could tell that she was determined. Heartbroken though, he let her go without further persuasion. But the fact that this woman living was plausible for Liu Yun'an's sister. She had always despised this Chen Aiqin. She was extremely lazy. She didn't get jobs nor did any housework. And you, my brother, even have to wash her underwear, while financially supporting the whole family. But Liu Yun'an still had these illusions. What if she would choose me? After Chen left, Liu took care of her children, treating them as if they were his own. But not long after she left, Liu Yun'an learned that Chen Aiqin was living with Feng Xianwei from the moment she stepped out of their home, and she even picked up all her kids from Suihua City without telling him. She didn't pay him back as she promised, and she left completely from his life. Liu Yun'an felt his world was ruined, though he only just signed and let it go. She wasn't faithful for her words, but he would treat it as he promised once to his sister. It was like a patronage to this sweet lady for this short period of time, and it should end this way, peacefully and quietly. As the days went by, Liu Yun'an started to move on, but a month later, Chen Aiqin suddenly called again to tell Liu Yun'an that her children were starting schools and she needed money. Could he wire her some money? Imaginably, Liu Yun'an was pissed. She lied and scammed him, and now she wanted more. Liu Yun'an had a clearer mind now. The two of them were no longer in a relationship. There was no obligation for him to remit money to her. But then Chen Aiqin said something that moved Liu Yun'an. "I never wanted to leave you. It's just that the children were not used to the diet and climate in the northeast. And if you could think of moving to Xuchang, we can still be together." When he heard this, his rational side kept reminding him that she's not worth it, but his emotions pointed to the other way. He still had a crush on her, As he faltered, there was a little girl's cries came from the other side of the phone. "Uncle, you come back! Come back! Me and my siblings are very, very miss you. We don't know what to do without you." Liu Yun'an recognized that as the second daughter of hers, who he adored the most, and his heart melted right at the time, feeling if that was his own daughter calling for him. That could be just an excuse for him to justify his action. Don't think he paid any true love to those kids. After that phone call, Liu Yun'an rushed to Henan and returned to Chen Aiqin. Looking back on this part, Liu Yun'an described what what he thought was, as long as there was home, there was hope. Although the kids were not his own, they called him either uncle or father. He didn't care. At least he had someone to talk to, and he felt he was no longer lonely when he was surrounded by Chen Aiqin and her kids. In order to show his determination to settle down there, Liu Yun'an borrowed 30,000 yuan from his family and arrived to Xuchang. Chen Aiqin and him rented a house and started this mushroom growing business locally in Xuchang city, earned a considerable amount of income from it. But things go south again when Liu Yun'an seemed to have a possible life change. Just as Liu continued to expand farming, the two of them began to have conflict. Chen Aiqin, addicted to playing cards and spent her days and nights at the table. She ignored the children and gave no interest to their business either. At first, Liu Yun'an was kindly reminded her, but she often reacted violently to his concern, and it always led to a nasty argument. And that day, after a bad argument, Chen Aiqin brought a gang of men to exile Liu Yun'an. Cliché as it is, one of those were Feng Xianwei. When Feng Xianwei arrogantly asked Chen Aiqin what was her relationship with Liu Yun'an, Chen Aiqin replied in public, "He was just a worker I hired for the mushroom growing." Liu Yun'an had no choice but to slam the door and leave. When Liu Yun'an returned to their rented house a few days later, wanted to talk to Chen Aiqin. He caught Chen Aiqin and her so-called cousin, Feng Xianwei, were having dinner together, both wearing pajamas and shorts, and looking very affectionate. Before Liu Yun'an said anything, Feng Xianwei asked him why was he there. Liu Yun'an got angry immediately when he heard such ridiculous question. He had paid and rented the house, and he started this whole mushroom growing business all by himself. And now a so-called cousin, acting like he was the host of the family, questioned him, Liu Yun'an, the real host, the real owner of everything. Very drama and absurd. So understandably, Liu Yun'an viciously replied, "What do you think I'm doing here? I've come back to kill you." Feng Xianwei bursted out laughter. His eyes were full of contempt and purposely ignored Liu Yun'an. He cocked his head and picked up Chen Aiqin's chin, said frivolously, "Aren't you my darling?" Chen Aiqin, out of Liu Yun'an's mind, answered sweetly to that question. Liu Yun'an's pride were completely shredded, and he felt humiliated like never before. He rushed into the kitchen and pulled out a kitchen knife, swung it at Feng Xianwei. Feng Xianwei, in the other hand, dodged swiftly. He didn't get harmed at this chaos. Witnessing it all, Chen Aiqin was so frightened, but she called the police right away. Seeing Feng Xianwei was lucky enough to dodge his attack, Liu Yun'an's mind cooled down a bit. He knew there was gonna be quite some time before the police arrived, but Feng Xianwei could have some friends living nearby. So he quickly fled out of the house and hid in the place of his friend, just so he wouldn't run into trouble right at the time. When he was at his friend's place, Liu Yun'an called Chen Aiqin. "Either you take the children back to the northeast in 10 days, or you return the money with interest to me for a total of 60,000 yuan. The next day, Chen Aiqin called back and promised that Liu Yun'an wouldn't get any trouble for harming Feng Xianwei. She would pull back the case from the police as long as he'd come back and had a conversation with her face to face. Liu Yun'an bought her sayings again, though this time he swore to himself that if he ever took any humiliation again, then he's gonna take real action to eliminate them all. He always been a man to his own words. Liu Yun'an returned to this rented house the next day, but she wasn't home. She didn't show up until it was dark. He knew right away that she was with Feng Xianwei the whole day. Liu Yun'an was annoyed. He asked peacefully, how did she plan to end this whole thing? Chen Aiqin replied with an attitude. If he would stop asking for money and leave Henan province, they'd be all good. Well, that was not what he was expected. And Liu Yun'an got angry instantly, of course. course, and swayed with random threats. I think he didn't want to harm Chen Aiqing at this time. He was just angry and didn't know what to say anymore. But Chen Aiqing removed her disguise. She returned home prepared. While Liu Yun'an was still swearing, a gang of men rushed into the house and started to beat him. She had planned it with Feng Xianwei. It's a plain setup for Liu Yun'an. Liu Yun'an was blinded for love before, but now that his love was withered, he could see through their trickeries well and clear. So Liu Yun'an, with a bloody nose and swollen face, couldn't suppress his rage any longer. He bought 2 sharpened knives and planned to retaliate. About 1 a.m. on the 31st of December 2011, Liu Yun'an sneaked into the rental house and hiding in the dark. He noticed there was a male voice was saying something, so he took off his shoes and walked barefoot just so no one would hear his approach. After the conversations were clear to Liu Yun'an, he realized there was no way for him to let them both alive. Feng Xianwei said to Chen Aiqing, "Oh shit, that douchebag was humiliated too much. We shouldn't do it. As if he was still under your control, we can keep milking him. With money now is about to celebrate the Spring Festival. You might want to contact him again, just so we can have a full wallet for the festival. You can dump him whenever you want after the festival." "Nah, I'm not gonna call him anymore. You've got no idea how I suffered to be with him. He was so disgusting. I'd take breaks each time meeting him. Otherwise, I'd vomit right to his face." It's her voice, Liu Yun'an recognized it, and his anger submerged him. He kicked open the door and killed them both with the knives. He made quite some noise while attacking them, and it awakened those kids. They both cried and begged him not to harm them, blinking those innocent eyes, and intimately called him uncle, as they did before. Liu Yun'an seemed to be touched. He sent them back to their rooms and tucked them into beds. But before he left, he changed his mind. He returned and killed those 2 kids eventually. After he was arrested, Liu Yun'an was shown with photographs of those 2 kids after they passed away. Liu Yun'an trembled and cried. He seemed regretted deeply for what he had done, especially to them. At that moment, he didn't seem to have any courage to face up the cruelty that's made by him. On the 24th of April 2013, the Xuchang Intermediate People's Court sentenced Liu Yun'an to death for homicide. Liu Yun'an was satisfied to this penalty. He once said to a documentary he only found himself deserved to die after what he had done. To solve this case wasn't difficult when the police identified all the deceased. In this case, Liu Yun'an didn't marry legally to Chen Aiqing, but he indeed treated her as his wife. He forgave her many times until he discovered the hard truth that she was just been using him. I believe so if they were truly in love and built a healthy relationship, things wouldn't end like this. Hope you have a good day and night, and see you in the next case.